Welcome back to it, guys. The Now Morning Show, Tobago Thursday version, where raucous is being raucous. The use of this song actually alludes to our next guest because we're talking animals. So joining us from Tobago is Dr. Paul Crooks, the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Veterinary Association. No stranger to the Now Morning Show as we explore the importance of spaying and neutering pets. Good morning and welcome back, Dr. Crooks.
Good morning, and thank you for having me again.
I particularly look forward to this conversation as a responsible pet owner who has in fact spayed her dogs. But for persons who need a little bit more context, I'd like to mention that yesterday we had a beautiful conversation with conservationist Ricardo Mead, who helped to establish what was really a mind-blowing fact. And that is that the unregulated population of felines actually directly impacts the raptors in Trinidad and Tobago, as they tend to attack these birds, and the birds will therefore wind up in conservations and need to be continuously maintained, which is really an expense as well, as a result of basically people not spaying and neutering their cats. I never thought of that before. So we see where it's really, really important, and therefore a need to break down spaying and neutering first and foremost, so that owners of dogs and cats can be more responsible. What's the difference?
All right, so Bob Barker would have popularized spay and neuter on his Price is Right program, which probably most of us would have grown up with at this point. Spaying is largely used now for the female version of the surgery that we perform, and neutering is for the male version. Basically, both of them mean the same thing: the removal of the gonads, which are the organs responsible for the production of sex hormones and largely for causing reproductive behaviors and for stimulating reproductive patterns and reproduction on the whole. So you have spaying in the female, you have neutering in the male. What do we do? In both of these procedures, we are performing a surgery that removes parts of the body responsible for sexual behavior and sexuality. So in the female, we remove. Sorry,
you go right ahead because you're making the distinction in the female.
So in the female, we remove the ovaries and the womb, which is inside the abdominal cavity. Whereas in the male, we remove the testicles, which are outside of the abdominal cavity. So in terms of surgical risk and so on, there are pretty big differences and implications for complications and the possibility of a relatively negative outcome of surgery. So spay and a neuter, both of them, but a spay in particular, is not something a vet takes lightly. And therefore, we have to weigh what are the positive outcomes of this surgical procedure versus the risks of performing the surgery. And this is where we come to what we're talking about today.
Right. Before we actually get into those comparisons, give me a little insight as to what is a good candidate, if you will. Do we have to look at a certain age or a certain size for our animals, and specifically our cats and dogs in this conversation, perhaps? Because it's not something that is limited to cats or dogs. Of course, you could spay or neuter other animals. I imagine it's just a different term. But granted that most persons own cats or dogs, can we talk in the context of those animals? What do we need to look at, or what makes a good candidate for spaying or neutering?
It really depends on who you speak to and what they're trying to achieve. So, for example, we might do very high volume spay and neuter programs where we're really trying aggressively to decrease the stray animal population, where we may not be so discerning in the age and the growth patterns and so on of the animals that are being spayed and neutered. We're most importantly trying to decrease the stray animal population, so we would basically welcome all comers. Right. Generally, if you go to a veterinarian would recommend that an animal is as healthy as can be determined reasonably at a relatively low cost, that only those animals undergo elective surgery, which is surgery that could be delayed or may never be performed for the health of the animal. So you are looking at a healthy animal. Now, in terms of age and size, again, it depends on the vet you are speaking to, his level of experience, the type of technology he has available. Generally, the recommendation is that an animal is spayed or neutered before the animal comes on puberty or attains puberty. In general, you're looking at approximately an 8-month-old animal that attains puberty. 8-month-old dog, 8-month-old cat. So you're looking to spay somewhere after all of your vaccines have been completed, which usually ends you up at around 4 to 5 months old, and then before that 8-month period. So typically spays are within the 6 to 7 months period,
Okay.
but it varies. If you have, for example, a very large breed dog, larger breeds really need those sex hormones to help guide the growth of their bones and the way that their muscles and joints fuse around, uh, and bones all form joints and work together. So basically, if we spay an animal that is a larger breed, a rapidly growing dog, too young, that animal may not grow the way it should and may end up with limb deformities. That's more recent work that's been done. So for larger breed dogs, we recommend that they're spayed or neutered at 2 years old. Of course, then you have the inconvenience of trying to keep them separate from the males and all the stray dogs coming around and so on. But these are, again, the pros and cons that we have to weigh. But generally, an animal that's around 7 to 8 months old can be spayed and is usually spayed or neutered.
Got it. Taking note here, although my animals are well beyond those ages, but you mentioned earlier that there are behavioral changes that we will also see when we look at spaying or neutering. And so as we delve into the positives or the pros, tell me some of the benefits therein, behavior-wise, that we'll see in our animals once they're spayed or neutered.
Well, every pet owner who's had a dog or cat in heat would know the kinds of behaviors that you discourage. So in particular for cats, if you look at male cats can be aggressive, they can mark, they'll pee on the furniture,
Right.
on the curtains. And it's found that in cats in particular, those behaviors are often reduced, not necessarily eliminated, as a result of neutering the male cats. Female cats and male cats both roam the environment very much, which is why they impact the wildlife species that we alluded to at the start. You have cats roaming the environment looking for other cats to meet, and you have male cats fighting one another, which is usually as a direct consequence of this roaming behavior and seeking a female in heat. You have female cats going out and getting pregnant. So those are behaviors that are also discouraged. Of course, every individual animal, just like every individual person is an individual. So even though you spay or neuter, behaviors may maintain, but at the same time, these animals will typically reduce those exploratory behaviors, tend to stay home more, probably less likely going to affect the wild animal population. Cats may be difficult to contain unless you're an apartment dwelling person. They may be difficult to keep restricted in your environment, but really that's something that we recommend, even if an animal is spayed or neutered, because cats could be so devastating to the environment. And of course, on the dog side, you have a female who comes in heat, so there's dripping of blood. She's sexually attractive to males, and those males will come from who knows where. They'll be all around your gate, by your pen, by your kennel, if that's what you have. If you have a male and a female, and the female is in heat and the male is intact, that male dog will try to break down the kennel door, destroy wood paneling, pull everything apart to try to get access to that female. That's how bad it can be. So you're looking at potentially destruction of property. But then even if we remove that, and again, we look at the roaming dog aspect, which is very common in Tobago, you have dogs that are going to be in packs. You have dogs that are fighting one another. So your male dog comes home and now you have to deal with all these bite wounds, or you have to deal with maggot wounds. And of course, in Tobago, where we have a lot of roaming sheep as well, you have animals that are more inclined to attack in a group, to attack prey animals like sheep. And then people in Tobago may respond by poisoning, which is unfortunately a fairly common thing. So that's another behavior we want to discourage, that roaming behavior. We want to discourage the pack mentality from stray dogs as far as possible. And of course, these animals destroy wild animals, they tear apart garbage, they could possibly contribute to road traffic accidents. So all of these factors we have to think about when we spay and neuter.
I'm really glad that you've completely related it to current day situations, not just the isolation of the number of them being too large, but how it impacts us as a society. You did, however, mention economic impacts as well, and I'm curious as to what that could look like. Are we thinking of, as a result of, for example, those road accidents, the expenses of repair? How does that trickle down?
Absolutely. Well, we look at loss of biodiversity. So if we have a green tourism product where we're trying to bring people down to participate in our natural settings, to observe birds, lizards in their natural setting, then you introduce cats, which are really, honestly, the domestic cat is an invasive species in much of these environments. And especially when we have stray cat population that goes out of control very quickly because cats can reproduce like crazy. And if these animals are stray, good luck catching them. So you have these stray cats out there reproducing and really decimating wildlife populations. That affects, of course, tourism. Outside of that green tourism, you have tourists who come and say, well, this hotel has 500 stray dogs outside. I would not recommend they come here. Some hotels we've even encountered here in Tobago have used poison as a way to control stray animal populations, which is something we absolutely condemn in the strongest possible terms. We've tried to work with hotels. Some hotels have worked with us to capture, spay, release, to set up enclosures to keep these spayed, healthy animals so that tourists can come and play with them. But outside of that, you have these situations where tourists are posting 0-star reviews because they're interacting with stray animals and stray animals are chased, they're beaten, they're poisoned. So you have that tourism implication as well. And of course, public health considerations. As we mentioned, we have the possibility of road traffic accidents, damage to vehicles. I mean, even as a driver, if you see an animal come in front of you, what's the right response? Do you swerve away or do you drive into the animal? When swerving away might actually put other drivers at risk and put your life and other person's lives on the line. And then you have the tearing up of garbage. You have the carcasses that are on the road because consequently, you have these stray cats and dogs running all over the place. You're going to have people colliding with the animals. They're going to die. And then you have these decomposing animals. And so we have all of these factors that impact the economy on a larger scale, which is why our recommendation is if you have no intention to breed, and 90% of owners should not breed their animals for any reason, because some people think, oh, she should just have 1 litter, and then they have 10 puppies, and they're like, well, what do I do with these 10 puppies? Why did you want it to have 1 litter? So our recommendation is generally just spay or neuter, please. Do your part to help. It is part of being a responsible pet owner and part of decreasing the negative impacts of stray animals.
Dr. Crooks, it is always delightful to have you because the insight that we get can be applied immediately. I think you've done a great job of underscoring why it's important to spay and neuter. So we're going to encourage persons to continue to connect to the Trinidad and Tobago Veterinary Association and their local vets so that they do exactly that. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Always delightful. And let me just say that I have, in fact, spayed my 2 female dogs, so don't try to come for me. But you can come back to the Now Morning Show as we've got much more exciting conversations to be had after these messages. I did. The guy, not so much. I was wondering which one to...